My name is Linda Sucker, and I'm 33 years old. My parents' 40th anniversary party was supposed to be a joyful celebration, but honestly, I should have known better than to expect even one peaceful evening with my mother in the room. The country club ballroom was decorated exactly the way she liked everything. Way too much, way too polished, way too perfect. White roses covered every table, a string quartet played softly in the corner, and nearly 80 guests were dressed like they were headed to some royal wedding instead of my parents' anniversary dinner. My husband, Cole, stood beside me in his charcoal suit, his hand resting gently on the small of my back the way it always did whenever he could tell I was stressed. He knew. He always knew. We'd been trying to have a baby for almost 3 years. 2 rounds of IVF had both failed. The second one ended only 6 weeks earlier, and I still hadn't shared the full details with most of my family. I only told them it hadn't worked out this time. I just wasn't ready to talk about it. Grief like that doesn't exactly fit into casual party conversation, you know? But my mother has never been the type to respect boundaries once a door is closed. Dinner had just been served when she stood up with a champagne glass in her hand, lightly tapping it to get everyone's attention. She absolutely loved giving toasts. Truth be told, she loved being the center of every room. I figured she'd talk about my father, about their 40 years together, maybe tell the story of how they first met. Instead, she looked straight at me. I just have to say, she began, her voice carrying across the quiet ballroom. Some of you know my daughter Linda has been struggling to have children. 2 IVF attempts now, both unsuccessful. She said it with a tiny, sympathetic laugh, like she was sharing some harmless little story about the weather. I keep telling her, maybe it's just not meant to be. Not everyone is built for motherhood. The room instantly fell silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence, but the awful kind where everyone realizes something seriously messed up just happened, and nobody knows where to look. I felt my face burning. I could feel nearly 80 pairs of eyes turning toward me. My own mother had just turned the most heartbreaking chapter of my life into entertainment for the entire party. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to get up, walk right out of that ballroom, and never look back. My hands trembled beneath the table, and I kept staring down at my plate because I couldn't bring myself to look anyone in the eye. Then Cole stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. Not in the way you'd expect, anyway. He simply placed his napkin on the table, slowly buttoned his jacket, turned toward my mother, and spoke with a calmness that somehow hit even harder than yelling ever could. "Diane," he said, using her first name, which he almost never did. "I have 17 voicemails saved on my phone from the last 3 years. Every single one is Linda crying after another failed appointment, another failed transfer, another heartbreaking test result. 17 different times I've had to hold her together while she completely fell apart. So before you say one more word about what she's supposedly built for, I think everyone in this room deserves to understand what she's actually been carrying." You could have heard a pin drop inside that ballroom. My mother's smile, the same proud, self-satisfied smile she'd been wearing ever since she stood up with that champagne glass, slowly started to fade. Her eyes darted around the room, suddenly realizing every single guest, including my father, including her own sister, was staring at her now instead of me. "Cole, I didn't mean." She tried to interrupt. But he wasn't done. "You didn't mean to humiliate your own daughter on a night that was supposed to be about love." His voice stayed calm, steady, completely controlled. But underneath that calm was something razor-sharp. "Because that's exactly what you just did." I sat there completely frozen, tears stinging behind my eyes, watching my husband stand up for me in front of the very people who should have protected me first. My father hadn't said a single word. He just stared down at the tablecloth like he wished he could disappear into it. My aunt had one hand covering her mouth. Even the waitstaff near the kitchen entrance had stopped moving. My mother opened her mouth again, maybe to apologize, maybe to defend herself. Honestly, I couldn't tell. But before she could get another word out, Cole reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Would you like to hear one?" he asked quietly. "Because I think everybody in this room should understand exactly what not meant to be really sounds like." His thumb hovered over the screen. And right then, I realized my mother had made a mistake she wasn't going to be able to take back. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Cole's thumb stayed suspended over his phone. For a second, I honestly thought he was about to hit play right there in front of everyone. Part of me wanted him to. Part of me wanted my mother to hear my own shattered voice, to finally understand what she'd reduced to nothing more than a punchline. But he didn't press play. Instead, he slowly lowered the phone and looked at my mother with something that wasn't really anger anymore. It was disappointment. The kind that cuts way deeper than rage ever could. "I'm not going to embarrass you the way you just embarrassed her," he said quietly. "Because unlike you, I actually care about this family staying together tonight." My mother's face turned pale beneath her makeup. She carefully placed her champagne glass back onto the table, her hand shaking just a little. And for the very first time in my entire life, I watched Diane Sucker have absolutely nothing to say. "I'm not going to embarrass you the way you just embarrassed her," he said. "Because unlike you, I actually care about this family staying together tonight." My mother's face had gone completely pale beneath her makeup. She slowly placed her champagne glass back on the table, her hand trembling ever so slightly. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched Diane Sucker have absolutely nothing to say. My father finally broke the silence, his voice low and unsteady. "Diane, sit down." It wasn't a request. In 40 years of marriage, I'd rarely ever heard him use that tone with her. She lowered herself into her chair slowly, her eyes fixed somewhere near the middle of the table, unable to meet mine. Then I stood. My legs felt shaky, but I knew I had to say something. Not because I needed to defend myself anymore, but because I finally understood that my silence was exactly what had allowed this to keep happening for years. My mother had always had opinions about my body, my choices, my timeline. She'd made little comments at Thanksgiving, at Christmas, even on my birthday last year. And every single time, I'd swallowed my feelings because I believed that's what a good daughter was supposed to do. But not anymore. That stopped tonight. "You don't get to decide what I'm built for," I said, my voice trembling, but loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You don't get to turn my miscarriages into a dinner toast." Every one of those failed transfers took a piece of me that I honestly don't think I'll ever fully get back, and you stood up in front of 80 people and turned it into a joke. My mother's lip quivered. "Linda, I only meant." "I know exactly what you meant," I cut in before she could finish. "You wanted to make yourself the center of attention, just like you always do. Even at your own anniversary party, somehow this still had to be about you." My Aunt Carol, my mother's own sister, quietly stood and walked over, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. "She's right, Diane," Carol said softly. "You've done this before. Tonight, you just happened to do it in front of everybody." The tension hanging over the ballroom was almost unbearable. But underneath all of it, I felt lighter than I had in months. For years, I'd kept swallowing comments like those, convincing myself they weren't worth fighting over, telling myself family gatherings weren't the place for confrontation. But watching Cole stand up for me, watching him carry 17 pieces of my heartbreak inside his phone like proof that my pain was real, that it had been seen, something inside me finally shifted. I realized I didn't have to earn the right to defend myself. I didn't have to explain my body, my losses, or my choices to anyone, especially not to the woman who brought me into this world. I didn't have to justify my body, my losses, or my choices to anyone, especially not to the woman who gave me life. My father cleared his throat and slowly stood, lifting his own glass with a hand that was still slightly shaking. "I think," he said quietly, "we should raise a toast to Linda and Cole instead, to the two people in this family who actually show up for each other." A few guests cautiously lifted their glasses. Others simply looked down at their tables, unsure if celebrating after everything that had just happened was even appropriate. My mother didn't raise her glass at all. She remained frozen in her chair, staring silently at the tablecloth. Just 30 seconds earlier, she'd been commanding the entire room. Now, she couldn't even bring herself to look up. Cole reached under the table, found my hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You okay?" he whispered. I wasn't. Not really. But I nodded anyway. Because for the first time in what felt like forever, someone had truly seen everything I'd been carrying, and hadn't expected me to carry it in silence. The rest of the evening drifted by in an uncomfortable blur. muted conversations, forced smiles. The kind of heavy tension that hangs around long after the actual moment is over. My mother never spoke to me again that night. She didn't apologize either. Honestly, I wasn't sure she ever truly would. But something inside me had changed. For years, I'd let her words shape the way I saw myself. My body, my worth, my future. But tonight, in front of everyone she'd worked so hard to impress, I finally stopped letting her define me. As we drove home that night, Cole reached over at a red light and took my hand. "For what it's worth," he said with a small smile, "I think you're exactly what you're meant to be. Everything about you." I turned toward the window, letting the weight of the evening slowly settle into something quieter. Something that almost felt like peace. If this story hit home for you, or if you've ever had to stand up for yourself in a room that should have already been on your side, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. There are plenty more stories just like this waiting for you. Real, raw, and absolutely worth hearing. Go ahead and subscribe so you never miss the next one, folks.